everyone, and welcome to the China EVs and More podcast, where my co-host, Lei Xing, and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the global EV, AV, and mobility sectors. For those interested in making a comment or asking a question, just post them into the comment section. What Lei and I discussed today are our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. To our loyal listeners and viewers, welcome back. And to our new listeners and viewers, welcome. We ask that you please help us get the word out about this podcast to others and subscribe and like. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at Sino Auto Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.substack.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. A new car owner, Lei, that plugs in. Can you please introduce yourself?
I'm quite excited, to be honest, because it's a totally change of the vehicle ownership experience. So this is your co-host Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review, and a newly EV owner to be, hopefully by the end of this month. But this is episode number 240. So it's exciting times. It's early March, which means there's few things going on. There's a February sales numbers, China's 2 sessions going on. BYD, as we've seen the last several years, they seem to put on a show in March. And I myself will remember yesterday, as I kind of posted this, yesterday in the Chinese almanac is the Jingzhe, which means, sorry, I'm going to the Chinese thing again, the awakening of insects. And I chose to upgrade, well, not an upgrade, but switch to a Tesla from my current hybrid. And on the day that BYD announced this faster
version 2.
I think that yesterday was an interesting day, to say the least. And we have many topics to talk about.
And you know,
where do you want to start?
I still didn't.
And you and I are now both. You have an EV. I'm going to have an EV. So I feel like we're just a little bit more qualified to talk about EVs. It's hard to believe that we've been talking about this for 5 years, right? And
well, I'm on my second EV.
Yeah, you're on your second. So I'm late. I'm late to the party, but better late than never, right?
First and foremost, my initial thought with all the BYD stuff, because I wake up a little early, check my messages, and everybody's posting about everybody we know effectively in the space is at the BYD event in Shenzhen effectively. Yeah. China Driven was there.
Elliot.
Elliot was there. And so one person who was not there, Wheels Boy, because he is in the United States right now.
Okay.
So he pinged me and he said he's stopping into Detroit. I did not see the message until late.
Oops.
So we did not get to hook up, but he is doing a road trip. So Wheels Boy, travel safe. He should be making it to LA in a couple of days. So I just wish, and maybe I will give them grace because of so many other things going on in the United States, but these BYD announcements, they move the needle, okay? And we're talking about new version of the Blade battery, first in 6 years, and it's more efficient and it charges faster, but that's not enough for BYD. They build chargers to support the additional speed, and they're guaranteeing the cells for life. So that's putting your money where your mouth is, and it quickly puts the CATLs and Goshens and Kalbs and Eve Energies on notice that you better invest, you better have the best and brightest, and they better be working harder than we are, because you're not going to stay in front of us for very long if you are able to ever get in front of us. So what are your thoughts?
No, I mean, BYD, it feels like this is something due in the sense that the narrative is that they've had 6 months of consecutive year-on-year sales drops. And the domestic sales are, for the lack of a better word, disastrous, right? Asterisks, disastrous in recent months. And what are they going to do? Well, I think part of the slowdown may be the deliberate of this refresh of these newer products, 11, right? The 11 across their 4 brands that will be equipped with the second generation blade battery and the flash charging, 1500 kilowatt peak power, right? And at the same time, unlike, I think, being vertically integrated, they build their own chargers. They build their own energy storage systems at those chargers in order to augment the grid, because they know that putting these vehicles charging at that speed will put stress on the grid. So they have a solution for that. And I think it's almost like, okay, we know our sales are not doing well, or we're under a lot of pressure, but this is what we're going to do and continue to push the tech boundary. Will that translate to a rebound? I don't know, because the bloodbath is alive and well. The competition is still cutthroat. They're no longer kind of the darling. They're still at the top, but it's just that harder to continue to separate yourself from the rest of the pack, right? Because others are improving. And then there's the other narrative that, okay, now the NEO swap station, they're done. It's over. I don't look at it like that. I think there's 2 parallels going on right now. That there's a market for both the ultra fast charging, flash charging, and the battery swapping. CATL is expanding the battery swapping. So I don't think it's one taking over the other or vice versa. The market and the demand is big enough where both should work. So we'll see. And the other 2 very important things that caught my eye was one slide saying, BYD put this on the PPT. The first half of the transformation defined by electrification has successfully concluded. Think about that. Whereas the rest of the world, they're still sort of like trying to figure out and at the starting line. And you saw the XPeng VLA earlier in the week, right? They announced VLA 2.0. It's the age of physical AI where one model will be applied to all of their form factors. The electrification, what can you do on electrification? The second half will be all about this AI and smartification.
I'm going to qualify your statement about swapping and charging together. In China, yes, for sure. I think swapping remains relevant for quite some time. But if we look at the United States, we look at Canada, Europe to a lesser extent, some of the emerging markets, the charging infrastructure is not robust. It's not really out there yet. So if BYD is able to get in front of charging infrastructure in these emerging markets in the United States, then it would probably make swapping less of a priority for these countries. Because remember, swapping means buying batteries, inventorying batteries, maintaining batteries. And so you need a financial partner in order to do that. CATL, on the fleet side, that still makes sense because these fleet vehicles tend to be less expensive. And so I think maybe that's an easier way for them to maintain costs or lower costs. But if we look at the United States, and we can get from 5 or 10% to 90% in 9 minutes during a normal day. And I believe this is the number. In -4 degrees Fahrenheit, it can go from 20% to 97% or 95% within 12 minutes. I sit, sometimes when I'm driving, I sit at a charger for 30 minutes, 40 minutes to get to, from 30 or 40% to 90%. So I think swapping becomes more challenging in some of these other regions who haven't built out their charging infrastructure yet. But the one thing that I am reminded of. I watched Calvin Johnson, who's Megatron, the wide receiver for the Detroit Lions. He always used to say, we don't feel pressure, we apply pressure. That's what BYD seems to have as a philosophy. Like, you're going to get, I can't believe you got in front of us. We're struggling for the last few months. We're going to jump right back in front. And that should scare everybody, not just the Chinese domestic competitors. That should scare every single legacy automaker too.
Yeah, remember back in the days, BYD, and Wang Chuanfu has said this quite a few times in the press conferences, that they almost gave up on the plug-in route. Because for 10 years, right, for a decade, it was BYD's sales stayed at about half a million units. And then all of a sudden took off from the pandemic, early pandemic. It's the resiliency. It's sticking to kind of, his goal was solar, battery energy storage, and EVs, right? And how to close that loop. That's from the very beginning that he founded the company. But that's not to say, right? Again, we stress the competition nowadays, the BYD's early lead in 2022, 3, 4 as dissipated, right? It's much closer. It's because others are catching up, but then you have to go to a next step. So 4 or 5 more years, are we going to have sub 5-minute to full charging? I don't know. And what they showed are all real world vehicle testing, albeit they're still under control conditions, because it's not real world as to just people going to these charging stations like the Spring Festival holidays, where people crowd and you have to wait. And there's always the chickens and eggs. You have to build out these stations and where they're available. So always take a grain of salt, but at least what they showed are incredible, right?
They're supposed to be building 20,000 of those super mega charging stations by the end of this year. So they're getting and remaining very aggressive with that. Now, I equate what you had just said earlier, Lei, with they had this huge lead and then people started catching up. Think of Tesla. That's a good Western example, except for the fact that Tesla has decided not to try to jump in front of their competitors anymore. And they've decided to pivot their business completely. And so we're not likely to see any major changes to the 3 or Y this year. But, I think BYD, their goal to be a top 3 or top 4, let's say top 2, is well on its way to becoming a reality. And those that live in the mass market, because if we're being objective about BYD, Denza still struggles, Yangwan still struggles, Fan Chongbao still struggles. So the BYD brand is dominating, which means that in emerging markets, Wuling, Baojun, Chevy, some of the Toyota products, the Fiat products, those products might get wiped out because BYD is entering those markets where in Latin America, South America, Southeast Asia, where traditionally they've been strong players. And so it's going to get really, really challenging for the legacy automakers to remain very international as BYD builds more and more infrastructure in those regions and countries.
So 2 numbers, right, for February. BYD, more than half of their sales were outside of China. Chery, their 5 Chinese brands total, nearly 80% were outside of China. Is that an anomaly?
And Lei, they haven't even the United States, the second largest market in the world.
So I think what I was saying that is that an anomaly for this all of a sudden strikingly high share of exports in February, right? Or are we going to see a rebound in domestic sales? I think that's why I hesitate to, again, we said this quite a few times, that let's wait until March, where numbers are going in March. We can have an early indication of the healthiness, because we have to look at others, right? Li Motor, they're relatively well, but they have a target of 1.05 million. And if you do the numbers, they have to do close to 100,000 units per month for the rest of this year to get to that. Does that make you, right?
So this is kind of the tale as old as time in the automotive space, because if you add up all the automakers forecast for sales for 2026, it doesn't equal 90 million or 75 million
Right,
global units. It
right.
probably equals 110, 120 million. So most of these guys aren't going to hit those targets. I actually think it's a bit concerning that BYD is selling more outside of China than inside China. If that
Well,
continues, that shows weakness of BYD in the China market.
yes, but eventually, I think every one of these Chinese automakers, longer term, whether they want to get to a few million units or not, eventually their share of sales outside of China will have to be somewhere around 50%. And some have been on the record saying this. So that's why we're kind of seeing, did that come early, or is it just the February thing where there's 16 working days, but outside of China, things are still going on, right? Then you have to push and push.
If
So,
that were to be true, there would need to be a lot more manufacturing done outside of China by these Chinese automakers. I don't think they can continue to grow exports in a significant way like they have been the last few years. I think there will be tremendous backlash if BYD and Geely and these guys continue to stuff channels. But what you're saying is unprecedented. There's not a ton of companies that have that 50-50 type of equal distribution between domestic and exports. So I think it's challenging for them to reach 50%, because that would likely mean that they're weak in the China market, in my opinion. China should be easy for them. It's by far the largest passenger vehicle market in the world. So if they can have 12, 13, 14, 15% market share continuously in the China market, they should be fairly healthy. 50% seems really, really aggressive for most. Maybe not a BYD, maybe not a Chery, who has for a while now shipped more vehicles abroad than they've sold domestically. So remember, there are old companies like who's the one that was building in China but only sold? It starts with an A. iWays. Remember
highways.
companies like iWays, and they were only shipping, exporting.
Yeah.
So there's going to be those types of situations too. But 50
And
seems
then
like a lot.
you currently have this conflict where actually there are vehicles stranded in the Hormuz going into the Middle East. There's actually Chinese vehicles stranded at sea because of the
Yes.
Iran. So these things, and plus, right? I don't know what gas price is in your area. It just went up by over 25 cents the last couple of days here, which is kind of another incentive for me to pull the trigger, unfortunately. And BYD is the most aggressive in building out their overseas manufacturing footprint. The three companies you mentioned, BYD, Geely, Chery, are probably the most aggressive.
But I want to set expectations and realities here, because right now, Great Wall, Geely, Chery, and BYD are the only companies in China that are manufacturing abroad. Okay, so they've made that leap, and some of these companies
With
and
significant volumes.
Leap Motor. Yes. And some of this is due to kits. So they're not doing complete manufacturing in these other countries. They're shipping part kits on what is called CKD. And it's basically a box of parts that ship on a big boat, but it's using domestic capacity. Okay. And then shipping to Hungary or shipping to India where final assembly is done. The factory sizes in the countries where they're only shipping kits, much smaller. They employ less people and it's less complicated, and you can still use capacity from the China market. Now, if and when there's a handful of companies that begin to manufacture outside of China, then we should see, then it'll be interesting because complexity increases substantially. And BYD has been the only one that has been able to show us that they can continue to build and grow share at velocity in 100 countries. So
BYD is just a brute force, right? The other part of the press conference, they had these heads of their, over a dozen units come up on stage, called out by Wang Zhanfu. There's material, there's commercial vehicles, there's smartification, there's all sorts of these units, and they have 120,000 engineers across all of these units.
Let's throw a curveball. Let's congratulate our friends at RoboSense because I think they made a small profit last quarter. And we know that Lucid has confirmed that they're going to be using RoboSense. We know, although it's not been officially communicated, that Rivian is likely going to use RoboSense for the R2. And there was a huge announcement by BYD. Can you tell everybody what they're doing with RoboSense?
So all 11 new products revealed or launched yesterday across their 4 brands have options of exclusively LiDAR supplied by RoboSense. That's 11 out of 35 models that RoboSense announced in their Q2 2025 earnings. But will the rest of those materialize? We don't know yet, but it's at least 11 models currently. And I think with a single
from the largest automaker in China,
and both happen to be in Shenzhen, so it's like a local tag team, right? I think BYD alone could represent close to 1 million units volume for RoboSense. That is crazy scale.
Huge win.
Well, yeah,
because
and, I don't know what the arrangement or the cost to BYD is, but I'm assuming it's only in the low hundreds of dollars.
Now, that's not to say the Hesai and Innovision do not have foreign and domestic automakers that are using their technology, but RoboSense was, from an announcement standpoint, a little bit behind the Hesais and the Innovisions, but this really, really brings them up to the same level, at least from a impact standpoint with the brands, because to your point, Lei, BYD is the volume brand in China, or one of the biggest volume brands. So that helps fill the capacity for their factories in Shenzhen or in China. So big win for RoboSense. And for BYD to emphasize them as part of the unveil and conference is a huge thing too.
It's a huge bet. I think it's we'll have to see. Like one vehicle, for example, the Da Tang, which means the big Tang, right? There's the Tang, there's the Tang L, and now there's the Da Tang, which is a big Tang. All of a sudden, there's dozens of models launching in that segment alone, this large 6-seat 3-row SUV from across every single brand. I mean, the Volkswagen ID Era 9X just started production. Just one of many. It's not going to be easy.
I feel with every single announcement from a Geely or a BYD, I feel less confident that the legacy automakers, who I want to say have done their best to bring competitive markets and pull them ahead and launch them, the pace at which things happen in China is just unprecedented. And, Volkswagen Group, for sure, I'm picking on Volkswagen Group. They just seem to be falling all over themselves a little bit, and I hope they can get out of their own way.
If I put my stand hat on, Volkswagen Group, they just recently crossed the 4 million BEV global delivery mark, half of which are the Volkswagen brands, right? When that photo or series of photo of the interior of the ID Era 9X were released, my immediate reaction was, this is Li Auto and XPeng had a baby. Because if you cover the Volkswagen badge on the steering wheel, that's completely Chinesified. And then you have the other extreme where I post about this Shangjie Z7 looking more like a Porsche than a Xiaomi SU7. It's just weird. Like there's these two kind of extremes where the foreigners are actually copying the Chinese, and the Chinese in some way still are copying
the Chinese are still the Chinese are.
Yeah, but to see like Volkswagen completely go, first of all, they dunked on e-revs many years ago. Now they're
Yes.
producing e-revs. And second of all, the interior is like, we got to do what the Chinese got to do. 2 or 3
Li
years late.
poke fun at them on social about getting into e-revs because they made fun of Li Auto a little bit.
And
so,
yeah, that's the Chinese market. It never ceases to amaze you.
Well, and another Volkswagen Group brand, the Audi is the E5 is selling absolutely none. A few hundred sales in January. So, man, it is still quite challenging for the legacy automakers.
It wouldn't be out of the question whether that 4-letter Audi try or experiment, let's say experiment, it wouldn't be out of the question if that's killed and they go back to the foreign Audi.
This is where but this would be out of character for legacy automakers because normally they will hold on to something and just discount it just because of the capital cost that they've invested to launch the product. But go ahead.
And if history is any indication, back in the days, there's used to be these joint venture JV independent brands. I think Baojun is really the one remaining out of all of those. If you remember that back in the days, right? There's the Everest from GAC Honda. No more, right? There's one from Dongfeng Honda. Those are gone. So it's not out of question that this experiment fails. Because at the end of the day, doesn't matter what the badge you put on, right? It's the content.
I think the conundrum that they're in is that if they can't make these tough decisions sooner rather than later, it creates more challenges for them in the future. I don't like the oversimplification of comparing the automotive to becoming more tech, but in this instance, when Apple fails, a product fails, they quickly take it off the market. You would think that they would want to continue to sell 16 Pros and not cannibalize by launching a new product every year. But that's what they do. The gross margin is consistently at 40%. I am referring to a unicorn because Apple is just very unique. It's one of the few hardware product companies that have huge margins. Some of that has to do with the services they provide and the stickiness of their products. But this is effectively because, we don't think of Alphabet as a hardware company, right? We think of Waymo separately. That's a subsidiary or division of Alphabet, but Waymo it seems to be like its own company, you know what I mean? And they do something completely different. But man, it's because let's throw another curveball. You might have seen this, Lei, but I was at Scout Motors earlier this week. Scott Keogh, who's the CEO and president, he updated a few of us on the latest for Scout Motors. They're currently at 1,300 employees. They should start building at the South Carolina factory in late 27. So, the take rate, listen to this, the take rate on e-revs to BEVs
is very high.
87 to 13. So a few of those numbers really, really did surprise me.
Imagine Li Auto.
I really do like the cars. I really do like the cars that they have. So
imagine Li Auto e-revs only selling in the US. Big SUVs.
He didn't mention anything about Rivian because it seems to me, and we might have talked about this, because Scout is a Volkswagen Group brand. You remember he came to Europe, although Scout is not looking to ship to Europe anytime soon. But he came to Europe during IAA to kind of give an update.
Yep.
Remember that?
Mm-hmm. He was at the press event.
First of all, that tells you how important the Scout brand is to Volkswagen Group. Because another tale as old as time. We think of Volkswagen and Audi, Porsche, and all these great brands that they have. They struggle in the US market. It's a very niche brand, Volkswagen brand. Porsche sells really well, but we don't associate it. And Audi does okay, but it is not Mercedes and it is not BMW in the US market. And as China continues to struggle. As Europe sales fall, Volkswagen Group needs to rely more heavily on the US market. And so one of the big reasons to launch Scout is because Americans didn't see Volkswagen brand as an SUV crossover brand. But with Volkswagen Groups, let's talk strategy a little bit, Lei. I want to hear your thoughts. With Volkswagen Group's $5 billion investment into Rivian and licensing of technology from Rivian, do you think that Scout is a direct competitor to Rivian eventually? Because the Terra and the
Sure.
Voyager, does this make sense to you? Or do you think they should separate Rivian into only being a BEV brand and then Scout only being an EREV brand?
Yeah, sure. It's definitely a competition. Two companies that one is under your group brands and the other one you invested in. Rivian seems to be going in the EV route, whereas Scout is EREVs, right? So different play. But the type of vehicles are definitely, I think, somewhat overlapping. Although Rivian is going down market with the smaller R2, where I think the Scout, the pickup and they also have a SUV, right? Are still slightly larger, but EREV, and it remains to be seen, right? That this EREV seems to be Ford is going over the EREVs, right? Extended range. How
Well, the
that
F1
proliferates in the American market, that's still some years out, right? We have to wait until nearly the end of this decade. And how fast Rivian, they have 150,000 unit capacity plan for the R2. How fast they approach that volume? Not this year or not
So
next year. So, and part of the reason, right? I have to, as a consumer, we talked about this. I have to think about the maturity of the product. I just had to, with the deals, I just had to go with the Y over the R2.
I'm hoping that my 2-year lease means that by the time I hand this Mach-E back over, the R2 will have most of the bugs sorted out.
Okay.
And
And so
hopefully there will be more products that I'm interested in 24 months. Maybe even Scout, because they said that they currently have 150 or 160,000 reservations. Now it only takes $100 to reserve it. Let's assume that they can do manufacturing better than Rivian, because Rivian has been challenged with manufacturing. One of the things that is a bit of a head scratcher to me about Scout is that they built a platform that's EREV friendly and BEV friendly, which means it's not optimized for anything. But we didn't really get to drill down on too many questions, and he also leaned into the nostalgia heritage using new technology kind of hybrid thing. But I was like, most of the people that are looking at Scout weren't old enough to remember what Scout is. Scout is like a 70s brand. And I would think most of Scout's potential customers are much younger than guys like me, right? So let me see here. Thoughts on Momenta going IPO?
I think that was the first time I heard about it was even almost a year ago. So I think it's been planned. Good for them. And probably one of the bigger IPOs in the industry this year. Right? There's a robotic side, obviously, bunch of new investments recently, but yeah, it's about time. And with Waymo, right? I mean, the valuation and potentially what happens is right. So Wave, they posted about expanding to over hundreds of markets, if I remember correctly. How does Momenta expand globally, if at all? I think that'll be looked at because mostly it's in China for China, these customers.
Although they did have a significant presence at IAA last year.
Yeah.
We went to the booth for a little bit. So they're trying to become international through their partnerships in China.
Yeah. Because Wave and Momenta are almost like they're the same kind of the position company in the space, selling AI driver software, right, to OEM so they can expand.
And does Wave not being in China hinder their growth and their total addressable market? Of course it does. And does it decrease their competitiveness? Potentially, right? Because there are so many other players in the China market. Now, philosophically, how they approach the problem is different, from a technology and AI standpoint, but
that they don't have the geopolitical scrutiny as Momenta outside of China.
right.
So maybe
And
that offset.
I think the when you talk to folks, they would be much more comfortable with Waymo having one or two competitors that could keep them honest. What I do know about Momenta is that they originally wanted to do like Pony and WeRide and IPO in the US
In the
and then
US.
likely have a secondary listing, but it looks like they're going to be listing in Hong Kong and not the US.
Safe route.
Yeah, and so when that happens, GM is, and I think Toyota or Mercedes will
GM,
have some upside from
Mercedes,
that.
quite a few OEMs invested into Momenta. I think Toyota.
GM invested a significant amount, $300 million. So
Yeah,
they're going to see some upside from
yeah.
Momenta's IPO. Just a reminder, Momenta tech stack is in Buicks and Cadillacs in China right now. So
Toyotas, BYDs, Nissans.
the other thing too, our SIC friends, MG shipped 1 million units to Europe recently. So MG is pretty significant brand in Europe. For those that don't know, MG historically is a British brand. It was acquired by a Nanjing Auto Group, which then SAIC acquired in like 2008 or something like that, or
Yeah, 20
seven.
years ago,
Yeah.
2006
And
ish.
so, what we know of MG, especially in Shanghai, is that it's a fleet vehicle.
Yeah, so MG is got the British aura on top of the brand, which helps
Yeah.
helps the brand other than the Chinese brands. But at the end of the day, still the products are good. How much they're sold for competitively. So kudos.
And we talk about this now, like Geely kind of hiding behind European domestic brands, Volvo, Polestar, things like that. But I think if the Chinese are doing a good job, we're the importance of being Chinese in the next 5 or 6 years is going to be a lot less, or the controversy, because you're going to see so many of them in Europe. You're already starting to do that. I talked to someone who recently went to Spain for a month, and they were like, all I saw was BYDs. So, that's what ultimately they want to do in the United States, because BYD, by saying it, there's no inkling of being Chinese, right? The United States, that'll be the interesting market because of the current administration and the timing of Canada and what Mexico's reaction is going to be to all that stuff. Canada is moving forward for sure. They mentioned that they're going to be fast tracking homologation. So we should see a Chinese vehicle on Canadian roads within the next 12, 14 months.
Yeah, matter of time before they're here. How long that takes.
So Lei, what was your calculus on pulling the trigger on this Model Y with FSD?
Yeah, I've recently experienced, so I was in the Bay Area, I experienced the robo-taxi twice. And I recently experienced at home a self-demo drive where you take the vehicle for 2 hours and then you just put it on FSD. That was one of the big factors because we do a lot of driving to Connecticut, volleyball practice. Some days of the week we do a 100-mile round trip. And for me and my wife, that takes out of the fatigue in a big way. Because we've tried it, both of us, we tried the self-demo and how not only the capability, how well it works, but how comfortable you as a driver and the passenger sitting in the car, how smooth it is compared with us driving. That's one of the bigger reasons. The other ones are just, like I said, maturity product, the current incentives that are in place. I got a 16,500 trade-in for the hybrid, which give me 2,000 supercharging miles. I got the 0.99% APR, which is almost free money. And I get an extra referral, which gives me 60 days of more free of FSD. So I don't have to pay until another 3 months after I get the car. I have a charger 240 outlet at home. So all the pieces are in place for me to move ahead. And I get a lot of questions asked, if you were in China, what would you have chosen? That is exactly the conundrum here in the US. Because of the supercharging network, because of the majority of the product, because of less options, it was a no-brainer at this point to go with the Model Y. Whereas in China, my wife, I have to listen to her. She probably would have picked the Neo because she liked Neo a lot. And we've experienced the power swapping, how convenient it is to do a trip. That's the disparity between the two markets. Actually, I think in the US, it's a lot easier to make that decision. Whereas in China, there's way too many options. And you get kind of FOMO. You're like, okay, I got the Neo, but damn, the Li Auto is nice. The XPeng is nice. The Leap Motor is nice. Whereas here in the US, you don't have that. I got the Model Y. I think I probably picked 90% likely the best choice. That's kind of my thinking. And the EV experience, I probably have to get used to a little bit, saying goodbye to gas stations, but also
I
for
don't
the
miss
fact,
those.
also for the fact that if FSD, if Elon Musk is really what he's gonna do and put this car in the fleet to make money for you, I don't know how long that takes, but we're living in an interesting time and life is short. So what the heck, right? Get it and see where it goes. I was like, the heck with it. I'm gonna pull the trigger.
I just like having new cars every couple of years, and so I wasn't ready to purchase one. And for me, also at the time I made the decision, FSD was
Yeah.
still going to be an $8,000 thing, and I
Yeah.
didn't really want to spend $8,000 on something that I was leasing for 2 years or 3 years. So that was
Yeah,
my
I think the
biggest.
value that we see, and I have to stress this. We talked about this as being an enthusiast, not expert enthusiast. We know the limitations of FSD, but also the value that it brings. And for $99 a month, I think is very valuable, the current capabilities, because over in China, XPeng launching the VLA 2.0, they're claiming to be the closest to what Tesla FSD is. So we're gonna have to try it when we go back to China, and I can now compare to say whether it's close enough or not. And I know my driving
That's
habits.
so subjective, right? That's
Yeah.
so subjective, and it's such a marketing thing. Hey, it's as close,
Yeah.
like there's no
And,
definitive measurements.
and I know my driving habits and routes. It's fixed or pattern is normal enough for me to understand the EV will work. I think that's important for any consumer. How far you travel, what options of charging you have available to you. Then the decision becomes so simple. But there were a few months of kind of contemplating and waiting to see. And once I think FSD is a big factor.
If I could have gotten it for $99 a month, I probably would have gotten the Model Y.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And the size of it is good enough. You know, it's just the three of us.
well, not if your daughter ends up being
Right.
6'2", dude. She's gonna be
Yeah.
cramped back there.
She's almost 6 now, so
Yeah.
yeah.
So let me see
so
here.
it's we're gonna see. Hopefully the
Let's
next
go to
volleyball
comments.
tournament trip I can just take the Model Y. There's a trip coming up in Philadelphia. So it'll be, if I get that by then, it's in early April. If I get the car by then I put it on FSC and see how it does. It's a 3.5 hour, 4 hour trip driving. It's perfect
You
opportunity.
got the long range all-wheel
I got
drive?
the all-wheel drive premium.
Premium, okay.
Yeah, so 327 mile, 327
I think that's
mile
the
range.
long range. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So which is good enough. 327 mile. It's
The biggest concern I have is that the Mach-E right now range is not great. I mean, it's 30 degrees in Michigan, so I'm hoping once it gets to 50, 60, there's a substantial bump in range, but it's challenging, let's just say. Question here: what will the role of battery swap tech in the presence of fast charging tech? That's from Mer. We kind of addressed that, I think, in the beginning of the show, but my opinion is that swapping is still going to be a thing in China for the foreseeable future. Creates uncertainty as more countries build out charging infrastructure, specifically the ones that BYD have entered or want to enter, because I think they'll try to influence policy in order to get more of their mega fast chargers on the roads there in those countries. So SPX, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, it's again, I stress it's not one replacing other or one disrupting other. It's handing in parallel. There's a role for both to play, at least in the foreseeable future. And we know CATL is betting big on putting tens of thousands of these stations into throughout China. NIO is starting to build their 5th gen swap stations. They want to build another 1,000 this year. And how much really these stations open up to third parties like BYD's flash charging. They already announced that they're open to other brands. And the supercharging network here in, I guess also in China, but they've also opened to most other brands. It's you have a choice, right? I think and either will work. Like I said, if it was me or my family or my wife, she would probably pick the NIO. The battery swapping work great. That doesn't mean that there's not that many more customers choosing the BYD route of that experience. So I don't see one disrupting the other at this point.
The next question is, hey, SPX, thanks for joining us as always. Happy Friday, guys. Real life functionality wise, how close does BYD Blade 2.0 ecosystem bring the general public to the promised future solid state battery? With this, is solid state still needed? Great question. Lei, I'll let you go first.
Solid state. I mean, solid state has been around ever since we started the show, or if not much earlier. And look at where things are now, right? It's whether for show or for dough. We heard about Donor Labs. They put out some test results, still lab results. We heard about sodium ion, right? Sodium ion, first announced in 2023, Shanghai Auto Show, and still limited quantity of, let's say, certain ODD application, right? I think the mainstream, as we've seen for the foreseeable future, is going to be LP in China and the rest of the world. Solid state, again, 2030s, we'll see scale, but not anything this decade. And that's where things stand. You still have to push the boundary road, right? Battery tech and chemistry goes, but it's been a long time coming, sort of, and still not materialized from a commercially volume perspective. And people, I mean, CATL, BYD, any of these battery companies, they're heavily investing on R&D on solid state. The Japanese automakers, Koreans, but still murky.
There's so many ways to answer this. As long as China has 50% of mining rights for the minerals that use the for the batteries, lithium phosphate, they don't have cobalt or nickel, but lithium is still a thing. So I think there's going to be this push to be more independent on the mining and the refining. That should continue. Solid state, to your point, Lei, we'll see them in consumer products sooner rather than later. But from a passenger vehicle standpoint, automotive grade solid state, we're still years away, years and years and years. And then to get to mass production of that is going to be a significant capital investment for companies. So
so that's a key word that you mentioned, automotive grade versus lab grade. It's a lot in between.
Yeah, and what I would look at is probably sodium ion and how well it's doing in the commercial side in China, number one. Number two, I would also then begin to really focus more on LMR because GM and Ford are looking at that chemistry. Solid state is, to me, the ultimate goal that should, in theory, get cars to the same speed or even faster than gas. But we also have to remember that these mega chargers that BYD have, the grid needs to be ready for it. There needs to be batteries attached to those mega chargers. Yep. So there's significant investment. BYD kind of has free reign in China in order to build out infrastructure for the mega chargers, but they'll run into more challenges from environmental groups, political parties on adding infrastructure in foreign countries really quickly. I think that'll throttle some of their ambitions a little bit in these European countries and some of these emerging markets because think of it this way. If you're in an emerging market and you have a bunch of chargers that take up a lot of electricity, it raises prices for electricity for everyone else because and so I think there's going to be a lot of NIMBYism, like not in my backyard. This idea of fast charging electric vehicles is great, but when you combine data centers and all these things that consume so much electricity price is going to go up, and I think there's going to be a lot of pushback because of that. Let me see here. Jeffrey, good morning, good day, good evening. Same to you, Jeffrey. He says battery swapping is much more. No surprises there. We go through this rinse and repeat every time new tech is introduced. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
SPX Nomad, congrats on your new ride, Lei. Speak of sensible decision. NIO recently signed a 5-year MOU with CATL this week. NIO established a battery R&D center in Shanghai. What gives? Vertical integration? Wrong item?
No, I mean, right? This is a dynamic that CATL and NIO are essentially their customers and suppliers. At the same time, they're competitors because of the power swapping. But at the same time,
frenemies.
They want to use each other's, right? The Fireflies were supposedly be capable of swapping at the charcoal swap stations, and they have to work with CATL to kind of develop these standardized battery tech, right? So, I mean, you talk about vertical integration, but at the same time, there's that you often say that the make or buy, that's still in play, which is what NIO is doing.
And CATL has much more economies of scale, so NIO's trying to take advantage of that. Jeffrey also writes, we all know about the overpromise and underdeliver. Congratulations on the Tesla, Lei. Time to get a NIO in China. Happy wife equals happy life.
So we have this still this China 4 gas vehicle that nobody's there to drive it. Only friends are able to drive it, so we'll leave it there for now. So when I go back to Beijing,
that's because you don't want to give up the plate. That's because you don't want to give up the plate.
I don't want to, like, the plate itself is so valuable, and it doesn't make sense for me to spend money to change it because we're not there.
I applied for a plate for over 10 years in Beijing, and it never.
Yeah, you know how it is. So that vehicle worth nothing, but the plate on it worth more than the vehicle.
Got one more comment here. ET9, Lei, it's only money. It's only money.
Oh, cracks me up.
Everyone.
No, not the ET9. I'm going for the ES9.
ES9, yes.
Bigger than bigger.
Electric Tahoe, basically. The electric Tahoe. Anyways, everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Lei and I always seem to fill this hour. I thought it was going to not be a long episode, but thank you for joining us. Looks like quite a few people did today. So we will talk with you all next week. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.